Imagine the feeling of absolute isolation, of being utterly lost in a world that seems to have forgotten you. Now, imagine that 10 years pass. You are still lost, not to the world, but from it. Your body has become a part of the landscape, a relic of a past tragedy. This is the stark, chilling reality of what happened to Jennifer and Michael Carter, a couple who simply wanted to escape the city for a week of quiet hiking in the Stormwell Mountains. Their disappearance became a legend, a grim story whispered around campfires, but the truth of their fate was even more horrifying than any ghost story, for their remains were found a decade later inside a locked cabin, a paradox of containment and death that defied all logical explanation. It was a discovery that turned a cold case into a new kind of nightmare, a mystery sealed shut from the inside with no apparent way in or out. Jennifer and Michael Carter, both in their early 30s, were an ordinary couple living a very ordinary life. He was a software engineer, she was a graphic designer, and they both found their escape from the constant hum of urban existence in the stillness of nature. They were not seasoned survivalists or extreme adventurers. Their plan was simple: a 5-day hiking trip along a well-traveled section of the Stormwell Mountains trail system, a route known for its breathtaking vistas and gentle inclines. They packed their bags with the usual hiking essentials: lightweight gear, a small tent, and enough food and water to last them a week. They made sure to tell both their families the exact route they intended to take, a simple act of precaution that would later become a desperate plea for help. Their final communication was a short text message sent from Michael's phone to his mother a little before dusk on a Tuesday. He wrote that they had made camp for the night. The weather was holding up, and the view was incredible. The message was brief and filled with a casual optimism that masked the terrible events that were to come. It was the last anyone ever heard from them. The mountains, vast and indifferent, held their secret close. The Stormwell Range, known for its sudden, violent storms and dense, impenetrable forests, was a place of wild beauty that could turn dangerous in an instant. The alarm was raised the following Saturday when the Carters failed to return home. Their families initially assumed a minor delay, perhaps a flat tire or a wrong turn, but as the hours turned into a full day without contact, a gnawing panic set in. The lack of any banking activity or social media posts, both of which were completely out of character, solidified their fears. They contacted the local authorities, and an official missing persons report was filed. The search operation began in earnest. Search and rescue teams, assisted by local law enforcement and a massive contingent of volunteers, descended on the Stormwell Mountains. Helicopters with thermal imaging scanned the vast canopy, while ground crews combed every inch of the known trail and surrounding off-trail areas. The sheer scale of the operation was staggering, yet the results were heartbreakingly futile. There was no sign of a struggle, no discarded gear, no footprints leading off the path. It was as if the couple had simply vanished into thin air. Initial theories were put forward, but each was systematically dismantled. The notion that they had chosen to disappear was quickly dismissed. Their financial accounts were untouched, and their relationships with family and friends were strong. The possibility of an animal attack, while a valid concern in the remote wilderness, was ruled out due to the lack of any blood, torn clothing, or other signs of a struggle. A fall from a cliff was considered, but the search parties found no evidence of a slip or tumble along the known treacherous sections of the trail. The mountains had swallowed them whole, leaving behind a blank canvas of unanswered questions. 1 month into the search, a pivotal discovery was made. The Carters' car was found abandoned at a remote trailhead parking lot, nearly 50 miles from where they were originally supposed to have started their hike. The hazard lights were still flashing faintly, the battery nearly dead. The car was unlocked, and inside, everything was perfectly in order, as if they had just stepped out for a moment. This discovery deepened the mystery rather than solving it, for it suggested they had made it to a different location than planned. But why? And what had happened after that? The focus of the search shifted to this new area, a more isolated and rugged part of the range. Helicopters and ground crews once again scoured the terrain, but again, nothing was found. The mountains offered no new clues. As weeks bled into months and months into years, the active search was officially called off. The case of the missing couple, once a national headline, faded into a cold file, a somber footnote in the annals of unsolved disappearances. The hope that had once burned so brightly in their families' hearts began to flicker and die. 8 years passed. The trees had grown taller, the trails had been maintained, and the memory of the missing couple had become a faded photograph in the minds of all but a few. The Stormwell Mountains remained a popular destination for hikers and nature lovers, but to the Carters' families, they were nothing more than a vast, unforgiving tomb. A decade after the disappearance, a pair of utility workers were performing routine maintenance on an old, disused power line that ran through a particularly remote and overgrown section of the woods. The line, a relic from an old logging operation, hadn't been active in decades. It was pure chance that led them to the discovery. They stumbled upon a small, dilapidated hunting cabin, hidden behind a thick stand of pines and overgrown with moss. The cabin was known to the locals as a forgotten ruin, a remnant of a bygone era. They were planning to report it for demolition when something caught their eye. The cabin's single window, high off the ground, was boarded up from the inside. The main door, old and weathered, was secured with a heavy iron latch and a padlock. There was no key in the lock, and the wood of the door was old and splintered. It should have been a non-event, but one of the workers noticed something out of place. A small crack in the rotted wood near the padlock revealed a glint of color. It was a faded piece of fabric, a remnant of a bright blue windbreaker. The workers, with a growing sense of dread, called the local police. Law enforcement arrived and, using a bolt cutter, broke the ancient padlock. The door creaked open, revealing a grim tableau. Inside the small, cramped cabin, 2 skeletal remains were seated at a small wooden table, as if they were eating a meal. One skeleton was slumped over the table, while the other was propped up against the wall. The cabin was a mausoleum. The silence inside was heavy, a profound and horrifying quiet that seemed to absorb all sound. Forensic experts were called in immediately. The condition of the remains, a stark testament to the 10 years they had been exposed to the elements inside the cabin, made identification a difficult process. But dental records, coupled with a few surviving personal items found in their clothing, confirmed the horrifying truth. The skeletons were those of Jennifer and Michael Carter. Their story, once a mystery, was now a deeply unsettling puzzle. A small, rusted knife was found on the floor near Michael's remains, and a frayed length of rope was lying on the bed. What could possibly have happened? The most confounding detail was the lock on the door. It was locked from the outside. Yet, there was no key, and the cabin was entirely sealed with no other entry or exit points. How had the killer managed to lock them in and walk away? The case, officially reclassified as a homicide, was given to a seasoned detective named Walter Hayes. Hayes, an investigator with a reputation for tenacity, reopened the cold case file and began his work. He first revisited the forensic evidence. The autopsy, though complicated by the state of the remains, revealed a crucial detail. Michael's hyoid bone, a small bone in the neck, was fractured. It was a telltale sign of manual strangulation. The cause of Jennifer's death was more ambiguous, but her skull showed evidence of a blunt force trauma, though it was impossible to say for sure if it was a post-mortem injury. The small knife found on the floor was a red herring. There was no evidence of stabbing on the remains. The evidence suggested that at least one of them had been murdered. Hayes then turned his attention to the cabin itself. He carefully examined the structure, paying close attention to the door and the lock. The lock was a type of keyed padlock, a common model. The hasp, a hinged metal loop, was attached to the door, while the staple, a metal plate with a loop, was attached to the cabin's frame. The padlock itself was threaded through the loops and locked. There was no key, but what if the killer had simply used a piece of wire to manipulate the locking mechanism from the outside? A skilled lockpicker could do it, but the theory felt weak. The cabin was also completely sealed. The window was boarded up from the inside, nailed shut with large, thick nails that would have required a hammer. How had the couple done that from the inside? And how had the killer locked the door from the outside? The mystery of the locked cabin was the central paradox of the case. Hayes, a man who believed that every puzzle had a solution, was determined to find it. He returned to the discovery of the car and the last known location of the couple. He painstakingly reviewed old police reports and interviewed the few local residents who remembered the disappearance. He was looking for anything. A sliver of new information, a forgotten detail. That's when he came across a name that had been mentioned in passing in one of the initial reports: Silas Thorne. Silas Thorne was a recluse who lived in a ramshackle cabin not far from where the Carter's car had been found. He was described as an eccentric loner, a man who despised trespassers and viewed the mountains as his personal domain. He had been questioned briefly during the initial search, but he had an alibi of sorts. He claimed he had been hunting a few ridges over. It wasn't a solid alibi, but there was no evidence to link him to the couple's disappearance. He had been dismissed as a curmudgeon and nothing more. But Hayes saw something different. He saw a man who had the means, the motive, and the opportunity. Thorne knew the mountains better than anyone. He knew every trail, every forgotten cabin. Hayes obtained a warrant, and a small team of officers descended on Silas Thorne's property. The place was a fortress of junk and paranoia, surrounded by a fence made of salvaged scrap metal and barbed wire. They found Thorne inside, a wiry, gaunt man with a wild look in his eyes. The search of his property was methodical. They found no obvious evidence, nothing to link him to the Carters. But then, as one of the officers was sifting through a pile of old tools in a shed, he found something peculiar. A small, battered box filled with old padlocks and a collection of keys, all meticulously labeled. And among them, they found a key with a small tag that read, "Stormwell Cabin." Thorne denied everything. He claimed the key was just an old keepsake, but the key fit the padlock from the cabin perfectly. Faced with this damning evidence, Thorne's composure finally broke. He confessed. The motive was as chillingly banal as it was senseless. He was a paranoid loner who viewed the hikers as invaders, a blight on his pristine wilderness. He saw them as a threat, a violation of his solitude. He told Hayes that he had approached the couple, offering them a place to stay when a sudden violent storm rolled in. He had promised them a cozy cabin with a fire and a warm meal. They, naive and trusting, had accepted. Once inside, he had overpowered them. He had used a rope to strangle Michael and a heavy object to strike Jennifer. He then methodically sealed the cabin, nailing the window shut from the inside, and then, using a long, thick wire, he had threaded it through the lock's hasp and staple, and from a small, pre-drilled hole near the latch, he had guided the lock into place. With a final, cruel flourish, he had snapped the wire and pushed the padlock closed, sealing his secret forever. He then took the key with him and left the couple to their horrifying fate, their bodies serving as a silent, sealed-off monument to his rage and paranoia. Silas Thorne was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. The evidence, including the matching key and the chilling details of his confession, was overwhelming. At his trial, he showed no remorse, staring blankly ahead as the jury delivered their verdict. He was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The verdict brought a semblance of closure to the Carter families, a legal finality to their decade-long nightmare. The story of Jennifer and Michael Carter is a tragic reminder of how ordinary lives can be stolen by a profound and senseless evil. It is a testament to the fact that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are not supernatural beasts of the wilderness, but are instead ordinary men who possess an extraordinary capacity for cruelty,